Thank you so much. That was an amazing introduction. I didn't pay you enough. I'm going to top you off later on. That was good. I'm like, who is that dude? I was wondering myself, oh man, who's that? One thing that I'm pretty sure everyone here, I was yesterday talking to a lot of the speakers, and everyone here had to adjust their slides. A couple of times, right? I didn't adjust mine. I might have, but ironically, what I want to talk about today is where we are as a nation, what I think the administration is trying to achieve, why I think it's important, and some of the reasons why I think we've got some of the adverse reactions to it. So, propaganda and prosperity in the age of fiscal austerity, because essentially, when we start talking about taking $1 trillion out of government, that is a form of austerity. But it's a form of austerity that comes at the expense of the American taxpayer. I mean, the spending does normally. So we're good with that. And when what's one of the things that's being in the media that really has bothered me has been the coverage of President Trump's economic agenda, to the point where I think it's anti-American. In other words, people have been scared so badly. I had a guy I know for 30 years, he calls me up and said, yo, what's your man Trump doing? He's killing people out here. I said, well, what do you mean? These tariffs are killing people. What network are you watching? I'm like, what the? So, because remember, propaganda started in the First World War, and of course we know some famous instances of that, and it works. It really does. We have sayings in our country for different wars, like loose lips sink ships and things like that, because it's effective. And just to give you an example how they've been laying it on thick. Articles that are playing up the economic uncertainty. So thinking about tariffs in of themselves, or even making our government smaller, was it more frightening than 9/11 by this much? Was the potential economic impact greater than 9/11? Is it greater than the global financial crisis? Is it greater than COVID when the entire world shut down, or the sovereign debt crisis? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But the people who write these things and they put them out, these are the same people that worked really hard to make sure Trump wasn't elected. And it's working. So we get this last Michigan sentiment report, and you can see current economic conditions weren't too bad, right? The change for month to month is less than 3%. But look, expectations, right? People are now bracing for a cataclysmic, just the worst case scenario, things to be devastating, life to come apart. I mean, really, they are scaring the heck out of people, and it's starting to be reflected in all these different areas. This is sentiment across all economic income, right, brackets. And what's really worrisome here, the red line, because we know that the top 10% are doing 50% of the buying, in part because of wealth effect, in part because, the money's coming in, right? Their home prices are holding up. Money market funds are throwing off 5%. They're doing pretty good, and they're spending money, which is fine. But if they stop spending money, then this whole talk about recession or potential recession becomes more of a reality. And that's what's happening here, right? You talk yourself into a recession, or in this case, the media talks us into a recession. So from this same report, the same Michigan survey, this right here is the shocker. These are people who just said, hey, I heard bad things about economic policy. Look at that white line. We're going back decades. Look at that line. They'd never heard this much bad news about an economic policy ever. Of course, the average person is out there frightened. Then I wanted to share this as well. So now Google searches, or searches online for inflation, tariffs dwarfing inflation. Think about that for a moment. We had inflation spike to a 4-decade level where, to be quite frank, many economists thought was never possible, that we'd never get there again. And still now people are like, these tariffs are worse than inflation? Or they're worse than the economic hit I took over the last several years? And the funny thing is when they, in the news, when they say, well, uncertainty is growing, but they say it in a quizzical way. Wow, how'd that happen, Jane? I don't know, Bob. People are afraid. What happened? Well, so uncertainty, the impact of uncertainty. This is a New York Fed from Williams. He talked about it, and listen, obviously it affects behavior, right? It affects consumers, it affects businesses. This word uncertainty is a really frightening word. And of course, for the Federal Reserve, they've got to figure out a way to incorporate this into what they're trying to put together. And it's making their job obviously a lot harder. It's superseding everything. And unfortunately, the worst case scenario is being built into markets because of this. In the meantime, I talked about the consumer. I'm pretty sure by now some of you have seen these pieces. They were on local news, now they're in national news. All these people running to the auto dealer to buy a car and all that stuff. You know, I want to get the car before the inflation, before tariffs rather, you know. They think tariffs is a march, an army coming in, you know, a few people stocking up on grub and everything. Like the Canadians are invading. Down in Dallas, you're not worried about that yet. You probably never worry about that in Dallas, huh? You're like, I hope they do. We hadn't had a good fight since Santa Ana. Come on, boy. So the consumer scrambling. By the way, these inflationary numbers that we've seen recently, a lot of that is the fact that we've had an abundance of excessive buying. So that was another one that threw me off, the CPI number. It was hot. It was super hot. We thought it would be 2.5. It was 2.6. Batten down the hatches. It's sizzling out there. It reminds me, I don't know if anyone's old enough to remember like news in the 70s and 80s, but local news. It'd be like maybe 85 degrees and they have a picture of the sun smiling. Right? Now it's 85 degrees. They have this burnt orange, red color. It looks like hell, like the colors of hell. It's like heat wave. Like, I was like, damn. Things have changed. I wanted to put this chart up because coming into this week, this was the chart of the week last week. And this is egg, the price of eggs. This was, again, their favorite talking point for until a week ago. Have you seen eggs under Trump? Wow. It's just absolutely amazing. Of course, the price of eggs were like $1, and they went up to $6 by Inauguration Day, and then the momentum kept going, and it went up to $8. But they're down 50%. And the reason I like this chart is also eggs are considered inelastic. It's one of these things that it's really hard for us to stop buying eggs. No matter how high they go. I mean, we'll bitch about it, but we're still at the register buying them, you know. We love our eggs, right? And when you can get demand to slow down on something that's inelastic, it just shows you that this whole notion that people are going to buy whatever they'll buy at Walmart no matter what the price is not true, right? The consumer will change their behavior depending on where things go. So before we got some of the official announcements this week, the notion of tariffs, thinking logically, is a one-time hit to the economy. And you can see some of the numbers up here. I'll give you a chance to look over some of them. You know, they just weren't devastating. You know, a 10% tariff, maybe 60% on China, a small hit to GDP, again, a one-time hit. And so this really should have never been, in terms of the coverage of this, should have never been as crazy as it got, but it was crazy. And it helped to build into this sort of really ugliness that we saw this week in the market. So again, your retirement portfolios like kindling, Trump lit the match. And this is probably the most fascinating aspect of what we're seeing too. One of the things from a looking out, you know, the general public. Again, going back to my buddy who I've known for 30 years, and he called me about these tariffs. He mentioned the stock market. Now, you know, I'm looking at him like, my man, you've never talked about the stock market before. I mean, we both started in the projects. Now I live in a mansion. You never asked me how I did it. You know, now you're worried about the market. So anyway. One of the things that bothers me a lot, and everyone in here is an investor. I'm an investor, we're all investors, is how society has somehow, though, it's been sort of psychologically redesigned where we all live and work for Wall Street to do well. Like that's somehow like every 3 months, we get this report card, earnings season, and it's our job. It's now the new patriotism in America is this. You want a strong economy, so we need you to stay perpetually in debt. Wonder how you're going to send your kids to college, not have any sort of real savings for retirement, but you have to play your part and keep mindlessly spending your money so that every 3 months these earnings come in the way we need them to come in. And when I see people out there, listen, we all want to invest, we want people to invest, but the stock market is not our life. The stock market, by the way, is going to be fine. I don't care what, it's up, the forward PE ratio is 20. Next year it'll be up, the forward PE ratio will be 26. Next year it'll be up, the forward PE ratio will be 18. All of that junk, forget about it. The fix is in. The fix is in, the stock market's going to go up, and the fix has been solidified since 2009. So yeah, participate, make money, but realize that this is not the proxy for the average American or where America is going. In fact, over the most recent years, it's benefited, the top 1% have benefited so much more. So for us to live our lives or to be so focused on this myopically, when the local news starts leading with the stock market, it's disingenuous and it's dangerous. I've seen companies say we're laying off 5,000 people and the stock goes up 10%. Is there a correlation there? One is good for Wall Street, one is not good for Main Street. Anybody, you guys have heard of Arthur Burns? How many people have heard of Arthur Burns? About half the audience, yeah. So Arthur Burns, he was the Federal Reserve Chairman, and he's considered by many to be like the worst Federal Reserve Chairman, at least in recent memory. After him came Paul Volcker. Now, Paul Volcker, along with Ronald Reagan, they did some really tough things, and for a year and a half, the American public hated both of them. Then after that, we had an amazing run, a decade run of prosperity, where it was shared prosperity. It wasn't just the stock market, but each individual, Americans, did so much better. By the way, keep that in mind, since we're only 1 week into this grand experiment. But Arthur Burns wrote a paper, and I just stumbled on this. I don't know how, by accident, but I'm so happy I did. He was out of the office of being chairman of the Federal Reserve. This is about a year and a half later. And it's the anguish of central banking. And the reason I think this is so fascinating, it speaks to the problems that are inherent with the Federal Reserve Bank, right? Because even yesterday, every time they do the disclaimer, we know what we do affects all Americans. It affects all Americans, but you don't work for all Americans. And he talked about benign benefit neglect rather than those kind of things. This paper, though, was really fascinating. I just want to share a few parts of it. So fighting inflation in a world of massive fiscal stimulus. This is always going to be a tough part, right? And one part here, central bankers whose main business, one might suppose, is to fight inflation, been so ineffective in dealing with this worldwide problem. Remember when the Federal Reserve was first created, the promise was that they would end the boom and bust cycle of economics. It would be over. We've got a central bank, we never have to worry about it again. Of course, the same year we got income taxes too. But the point is that already we can see that there's a problem here. With governments spending money they don't have, stoking perhaps inflation, too much money chasing too few goods, and the Federal Reserve's job is to quell that. And really the only way you can quell that, at least the way the Fed measures this, is to get consumers to stop spending. Well, if the top 10% are doing 50% of the spending, essentially we're saying we have to get rich people to stop spending. Think about how much pain a rich person has to endure before they stop spending, and the other 90%, what kind of damage has happened to them? So I'm really concerned about the way they go about this, but this was the more intriguing part about it, how we got to where we are right now. Rugged individualism as a backstop to American success. So personal progress was generally viewed as a reward for personal effort, assisted perhaps by good fortune. Provisions for bad times or other contingencies of life were deemed prudent, but that was a private responsibility. This formula, this approach, took America from a revolution to the preeminent country in the world in about 100 years, a little bit more. How did we supersede all of these established nations that were already out there? The British Empire, France, rugged individualism. The idea that we can all pull ourselves up by the bootstraps. That was it. So what happened? Well, the New Deal. And what happened? So tradition of individualism was shattered by the cataclysmic events of the 1930s and 1940s. Later on, it goes down to say, a political idea that was novel to a majority of the American people. In other words, it was just like 90%, 99% of people thought, well, what do you mean government's going to help me? I'll help myself. My family will help me. My neighbors will help me. The American people, so it was novel to the majority of American people, but compelling nonetheless. Namely, that the federal government had a far larger responsibility in the economic sphere than it had hitherto assumed. So, again, this is the shift. This is when we begin shifting. Instead of taking care of our problems ourselves, government should take care of our problems for us. Now, again, by this time, we were paying income taxes. Before, during the period of rugged individualism, we weren't. We were making most of our money off of tariffs and things like that in terms of funding the government, but we didn't need a big government. We just needed the government to protect us and to keep us safe. We didn't need it for anything else, per se. So now the government's in our lives, the New Deal. Then it expands its role. Big government explodes in the 1960s. This was the first form of social justice. When the government undertook in the mid-1960s to address such, quote-unquote, unfinished task as reducing fractional unemployment, eliminating poverty, widening the benefits of prosperity, and improving the quality of life. How does the government do that? How do you widen prosperity? Well, they think they can. They think they can take from you and give to him. That's not widening prosperity, that's punishing success. It goes on to say, solve problems and relieve hardships, not only for society at large, but also for troubled industries, regions, occupations, and social groups. That's how we eventually get boys playing girls sports. This is the path that we've been on for a long time. And every one of these tasks that they take on has to be funded. Higher taxes, more regulations, more roadblocks to get us back to where we started with rugged individualism. So now we've got gargantuan government, huge gargantuan government that's doing everything that we used to do as a nation, that made us the greatest nation in the world, and big government needs a lot of money, a lot of money. The crowding out effect, that's what's happened. It occurs when increased government spending leads to a decrease in private sector investment due to higher interest rates. That's where we've been. That's where we've been. So how do we fix it? Doge, that dog will hunt. You know about that one. So the media, the propaganda has gone crazy over Doge, which to me is really kind of funny. Or, before they said, hey, what do you mean you don't believe in science? They tried to make everyone feel dumb for questioning the science. You question the science? Wow, how dumb are you? How unsophisticated are you? And then we should worship the scientists. We went from that just about a year and a half ago to this. I'm a little skeptical about this science. And these guys on Doge, man, who's big balls? I mean, come on now. These are frat house kids. They don't know what the hell they're doing. How do we make that turn? I always thought that, I was going to put it in a slide in this, that the administration should have been more aggressive. The interview with Bret Baier, with Elon Musk, I'm pretty sure most of you probably saw at least clips of it, was phenomenal. These weren't frat house kids. These were brilliant people, accomplished people, and they were making sacrifices, personal sacrifices. What they were doing was patriotic stuff, what they're trying to do. And what are we trying to do here? So this is a great chart from Apollo. They put out great charts. I don't always agree with what they're saying, but this right here, so we're talking A, the U.S. economy today. B, where we'd like it to go, smaller government, bigger manufacturing, lower imports. And I tell you what also would come with B, smaller income inequality, right? A better way of life. A lot of other things come with this socially. Less hopelessness means less drug use. The question, though, is that dotted line, the gulf, getting from A to B. How do we get there? How do we make sure it's not, too painful or too onerous? That's where we are in that gulf. We don't know what part of the gulf we're in, but if we have the wherewithal, if we have the stomach, and if the media doesn't scare us too much, we can get from A to B. If we let it happen, And if we let it happen, I think we could really end poverty, not by handing people checks, because that actually has cemented poverty. When you have generational welfare, you've actually created a culture, which is what's happened. I've lived in that culture. I understand it. People start saying, "Where's my check?" even though they didn't do anything to earn it. And I hear politicians running this stuff. Hey, I'll give you more welfare. I'll give you more government housing. They never say, "I'll get your kids, great education from K." Instead, they say, "We'll make sure someone with an amazing economic, who's done really well educational-wise, maybe we'll take their spot at a college and put your kid in there who didn't." And it's not a diss on the kids. It's just the parents have to play a role as well, but these school systems are bad. But you keep voting for people who give you stuff instead of demanding that you do something for yourself. So I think if we find a way to bring back industrialization, but also, more of this notion that we can do it, a can-doism in this country. All week long, one of the things that angered me more than anything else, we can't build factories overnight. Okay, but can we build them? Right? I mean, it's hard. We can't do a factory overnight. We want to bring back this rugged individualism. We want to do industrialization of this nation, right? And so for me, I look around, I look at these cities that China is building. Think about the cities that China is building and the stuff that they've built, and think about what we're building. We build pretty good football stadiums, right? We're real good at a football stadium. We ain't building cities, though. In Europe, poor Europe, they're living off the ruins, Make sure the Colosseum, whatever you got to do, hold that bad boy up. And then, so we have a president who's fighting an unconventional fight. I got to admit, even this week, I was caught flat-footed because I bought on the day of the Liberation Day, that day, because, I'm thinking, okay, there'll be reciprocal, whatever, tariffs and yada, yada. It wasn't. And, people can quibble and be upset about the formula that's being used, but President Trump reminds me of these folks when we were fighting the Revolutionary War. The British, proud and strong in their red uniforms, marching in together. And the militia is saying, you know what, maybe we should hide behind a tree. Just saying, might work. I don't know. I think we tried that at first too. Let's march with them, damn, there's a rock. I could have been shooting this dude from behind a rock this whole time. So you got to have revolutionary thought and tactics in this sort of environment. I think we're on the right track. I'm concerned about the market only because I'm concerned about the psychology out there. And obviously the velocity of which this market's come down is not good, the rapid speed. My hope is that somehow between now and the open on Monday, we did get some good progress on the big, beautiful bill, tax bill. That's a check mark. I'm hoping we get at least one deal announced before the open on Monday, something in the Rose Garden. And I need to see more Scott Bessent. So Scott Bessent gave an interview to Bloomberg, and he's more or less suggested he wasn't in the room for parts of this deal. And that, believe it or not, I don't know the exact moment he did that, but I don't think the market had an uptick after that. That was 2 days ago. I really believe that every single tick has been down since he mentioned that. He's got to be in the room. I like all those people that are involved, but he's the guy that I trust the most to really be able to connect the dots with this. There's a lot of people who are louder, want the spotlight. I think if Wall Street sees him on Air Force One, it'll feel much better. I know I would. Bottom line, though, we need to return to our roots as a nation. We can do it. Can-doism. We have a new working class, folks. We have a new set of, this is what America is these days. The elite educated class who are taking up all the spoils, the barista class who serve them. I mean, we brag about our service economy, but most of those are very low paying jobs. The blue collar class, which is very thin, and then the placated poor. Again, people who get just enough money that you don't necessarily have to go on a job interview today. You can push it off for tomorrow. Tomorrow becomes next week becomes next month becomes next year. Next thing you know, you've got kids and you've never been, and they're born in the system. I think to a degree we have to overall rethink the economy. So, yeah, it's great that we have a lot of foreign direct investment here. Very little of it, though, is what they call greenfield investments, companies really coming in, bringing in business and talent. I was on Fox and Friends the other day and got a little excited because people are like, well, my cups are going to, like all this plastic crap they had on the table, right? I'm saying the way it works now, so you buy all this plastic stuff from China, and you had this guy on CNBC, Steve Leisman, who said that we're lucky because Europe, for instance, sends us wine and cheese, and we give them worthless paper in return. Well, that worthless paper represents countless hours of our life, energy, hopes, dreams, wars, killing. It represents a lot. Technically, it might be worthless, but it means a lot. So we hand it over for that wine and cheese. In the meantime, they get the money. What do they do with it? They buy our farmland. They buy our buildings. So we're sitting in a building that they own long after we've consumed the wine and cheese. Just things that we have to think in some ways. Again, Europe is a great place to visit, but very little innovation coming out of Europe. I mean, I think the next big deal out of there is Klarna, buy now, pay later. Try explaining that to someone in the Bronx. Like, okay, so I can take all the stuff with me now, and you want the money later? Okay. Good luck with that one. Woo, this is going to be fun. When they break this bad boy out in the Bronx, it's going to be like Christmas. Again, we're great at doing stuff. We built some hellified football stadiums. Hellified football stadiums. But this is what China's building. We can do it. We have to have the fortitude. We have to be more than short term. We have to get out of this short termism. Even as investors, we need to get out of this short termism, this trance that we're in. This idea that it's going to be painful, too much pain. You hear everyone saying it's going to be painful. I know, listen, we have a pill for everything. And if you have psychological pain, you can go online and get you find you a psychiatrist on an app. Or you can play some soothing music when you go to bed. I know we've gotten to the point where we're trying to be pain-free. There's a reason for pain. There's a reason when you put your hand over a stove and it's lit and burns, there's a reason for it. There's a reason for hangovers. We should never get rid of hangovers. There's a reason for it. We should learn a lesson, right? We should, but we don't. A few people are like, you ever hear of hair in the dog? Yeah, I got you. Bottom line here is that, yeah, I don't know. There really should not be a lot of pain. I could sidestep most of the stuff they're talking about, prices going on. I don't need it tomorrow. It's not essential. I want us to get back to what we were. Reagan talked about it. A lot of people talked about that shiny city on the hill. There's the new shiny cities on the hill. As far as the market's concerned, I know a lot of people are saying, shift into Europe and buy Germany and look at China and all that stuff. I never abandoned the American market, never. This is the last, 40 years. You see that little circle there? That's how they're outperforming right now. Now, if you need to make money every day and you want to be a trader and you want to chase, fine. But that's Europe. That's the world market versus our market. So I'm not going to chase it. I'm going to stick with the U.S. market, and I'm going to stick with the United States of America. Thank you very much.